Meet General Sir Arthur Grenfell Walpole. Born in 1874, straight into the classic English path for colonial administration. Prestigious boarding school, military service, war experience in South Africa, a battalion commander in World War I, and later, the top military figure in Northern Ireland. His last official state appointment, starting in November 1931, was to the post of High Commissioner of Palestine, the top job in the British administration of the country. A year after his appointment, he appeared in front of the League of Nations Mandate Commission in Geneva. He also appeared optimistic. We would gladly govern Palestine in accordance with the wishes of the two races. When these wishes conflict, I shall use every means to reconcile them. Walpole would end up being the longest-serving High Commissioner of the three-decade mandate, leaving his position in March of 1938. In his farewell address, he mentioned, "The last 2 years would stand out in history as years of difficulty and disappointment, but patience was the cure of all ills." And this is British for "This place is messed up." Welcome to The Conflict, a YouTube channel dedicated to explaining the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My name is Dr. Arnon Degani, and I'm a historian. Today, let's take a look at the years of the Mandate, a time when the Zionist settlers and Palestinian Arabs were all living under British rule. How did the British get to be the people in charge of this stretch of land? As we mentioned in the last episode, in 1917, the British conquered the land from the Ottomans. Between 1917 and 1920, they placed it under military occupation. In 1920, the civil administration of Palestine began. Then, the League of Nations mandated Britain in 1923 to usher that land into independence. This mandate remained in effect until May 15, 1948, the day Israel declared its independence. To further understand the legacy of the Mandate years, I want to introduce a timeline of some of the main violent events between the Hebrew Yishuv, which is the pre-state Zionist settlement, and the Palestinian Arabs from 1920 to November 1947. Here we go. 1920, a Muslim pilgrimage festival to the supposed nearby burial site of the prophet Moses, Moshe, or Musa, devolved into 4 days of riots against the Jews of Jerusalem, leaving hundreds injured, 7 Jews and 4 Arabs dead. The British arrested Arab and Jewish agitators, among them this Ryan Gosling-looking guy, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who we will encounter throughout the period. And this guy also, Jabotinsky, remember from the second episode. 1921, a major Arab riot broke out in Jaffa, Palestine's second largest city, following a May Day procession of Zionist communist Jews. Word of the clashes in Jaffa spread to the countryside, where Arabs attacked several moshavot. The attackers were thwarted by Jewish defenders and the British military. 47 Jews and 48 Arabs were killed. Things were getting heated. 1929. This time, the fire started at the Wailing Wall in the Old City of Jerusalem, one of the walls supporting the Al-Aqsa compound. It began with Jews erecting a partition between men and women worshippers, continued with a Jewish-Arab tit-for-tat incidents of incitement, and then full-blown riots began in Jerusalem and spread to the rest of the country. The Arabs were the aggressors here, but this time Jews defended themselves more efficiently and even attacked and killed innocent Arabs. Arab rioters raided the houses of Jews in the city of Hebron, massacred, looted, and raped members of a well-established community that existed centuries before the Zionist settlement began. There was also a small Jewish community in the city of Gaza that was protected from danger by the Arab mayor. But after the riots, they felt unsafe and evacuated. According to historian Hillel Cohen, the 1929 riots were the event that solidified almost all Jews in Palestine, even those communities that predated the Zionist settlement waves, behind the Hebrew Yishuv. In those 5 days, 133 Jews and 116 Arabs died. Hundreds were wounded. Then, in 1936, an all-out Arab rebellion broke in Palestine against the British and the Zionists. It lasted on and off for more than 3 years. This time, the Arabs organized a massive strike and tax boycott to hurt the British government and the Jewish economy. They also created a representative body, the Arab Higher Committee, headed by, yes, Haj Amin al-Husseini, now the Mufti of Jerusalem. Their demands: cease Jewish immigration and land sales, and make Palestine an independent Arab-majority state. The British repression, meant to break the strike and quell the demonstrations, only made the Arabs more resolved, and a full-blown armed insurrection against the colonial authorities began. After 6 months, the British blinked first and orchestrated a plea for a ceasefire by the Emir of Transjordan, Abdullah, and other Arab kings, during which a commission would reassess British policies in Palestine. The strike was held off, and relative calm was restored so that the Royal Commission, headed by Lord William Peel, could work for a year and see how to solve the conflict between the two national movements vying for the same land. The conclusions of the Peel Commission constituted the first time the two-state solution was put on the table. The Jews will get 20%, the Arabs would get 75%, and the 5% remaining will be internationalized. The Zionists saw some clear advantages in this proposition, especially in the idea that the British would transfer some of the Arab population outside the would-be Jewish state. But for the Palestinians, the idea of giving up parts of their homeland was enough to reignite the rebellion. This time, however, the British, sensing the clouds of war gathering above Europe, dedicated all their might to suppress it. The British disbanded the Arab Higher Committee, and its members, the Mufti among them, left the country. The British also razed entire villages and bombed them from the sky. As with many anti-colonial rebellions, some of the violence turned inward, and the roving gangs of Palestinian insurrectionists sometimes blackmailed and forced the Arab villagers and townspeople to support the cause. While Palestinian society was crumbling under the force of the British military, the Hebrew Yishuv was gaining strength. Because of the disruptions in the Arab economy, the Jewish economy became more self-reliant. And to help subdue the rebellion, the British also recruited the Jews to special units, thus giving the Yishuv experienced combatants. In 1939, after smothering the revolt, the British issued a new white paper stipulating a new policy in Palestine. Essentially, the British decided that their commitment in the Balfour Declaration and the Mandate had been fulfilled. By now, according to the British, there is a Jewish national home of 450,000 Jews in Palestine, living among around 1 million Palestinian Arabs. In 10 years, Palestine will turn into an independent state based on the current demography. The white paper explicitly said that Palestine will not become a Jewish state and that immigration will be capped at 75,000 for the next 5 years. The year is 1939. Those were crucial times where Jews had to find a place to immigrate freely. During the years of the Second World War, the heavy hand of the Mandate managed to keep the Palestinians subdued, but the Yishuv was torn between continued collaboration with the Mandate authorities and fighting the 1939 White Paper. Once the war came to a close, the Hebrew Yishuv, particularly the right-wing factions, rebelled and caused quite a headache for the British, who, after the war, were exhausted and wanted a way out. So, they threw the question of Palestine back to the international community. In the final analysis, how should we consider the years of the Mandate? In their historical memory, Palestinians and Israelis like to think of the Mandate government to have been slanted against them. In truth, the British were pro-British, but there cannot be any mistake in how important the existence of the Mandate was for the development of the Zionist project. Here are 3 important historical trends of the Mandate period. Increased Zionist settlement in the land, continued pogroms in Eastern Europe, and the rise of Nazi Germany gave a tremendous boost to the Hebrew Yishuv, which grew numerically tenfold from around 60,000 to 600,000. Increased national tensions and violence. During the years of the Mandate, the increase in the Zionist population under the policies of the Mandate made the Palestinians feel like their land was slipping away. This led to a series of clashes, each one more severe than the one before, sometimes triggered by small events. Slow British retreat from their commitment to Zionism. The British slowly but surely realized that they had promised the land to the minority population, and the majority wasn't too pleased about it. So, following those clashes we just mentioned, the British would put limitations on immigration and Jewish land purchases in a series of less and less pro-Zionist white papers. But the important historian of the Palestinian national movement, Professor Rashid Khalidi, has described the fundamental feature of the Mandate as placing the Palestinians in an iron cage. Let's take another look at the Balfour Declaration's text, which was incorporated into the Mandate and stipulated that it must establish a Jewish national home in Palestine. What about the Arabs in Palestine? Did the British and then the League of Nations pay any attention to them? Yes and no. At the end of the Balfour Declaration, the British qualified the scope of the Jewish national home and mentioned the majority population of the land with the following words: "Nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine." Notice, the British only recognized the Palestinian Arabs' civil and religious rights and mentioned them as non-Jewish communities. National rights? These were reserved for Jews only. The Palestinians had an impossible dilemma. Every demand they had for an upgrade in their constitutional status, the British government would require them to accept the terms of the Mandate, which meant accepting the Jewish national home. That is why, for instance, the idea of creating a representative council for all residents of Palestine had been buried, because such a body would have been majority Arab, and it would have had to go forward with the Mandate's term, more Jewish settlement, something the Arabs would not accept. No modern Palestinian political party was formed. Instead, the leadership of the Palestinians was composed out of urban dignitaries and heads of important families that would take turns in manning the few higher-ranking positions open to Arabs, such as Mayor of Jerusalem. And that is why the representative bodies that the British did allow for the Palestinians were based on religion, communalism, and dignitary status. The first British High Commissioner, Herbert Samuel, a Zionist Jew, created out of thin air the Supreme Muslim Council and placed on top of it another made-up institution, Mufti of Palestine. To that job, the British didn't hold elections, but appointed, out of all people, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison for inciting the 1920 riots. Why would Samuel do that? It wasn't because of his Hollywood smile, I'll tell you that. Rather, it was the old British colonial trick of co-opting possible troublemakers among subject populations. While Yishuv institutions, such as the Jewish Agency or the mega trade union, the Histadrut, gained more state-like capabilities, such as defense, education system, public health system, and a seaport to the world, Palestinian society suffered from factionalism, tribal political rivalries, and exile of its leadership. All of this would lead to catastrophic results a decade later. And so, on the 29th of November 1947, after sending a committee to Palestine to examine the situation, the UN General Assembly voted on a partition plan for Palestine in which the Jews would get 55% of the land, the Palestinians 43%, and 2% around Jerusalem would be internationalized. This signaled the start of a war between the Yishuv and the Palestinian Arab population. We're going to take a break, so subscribe, and we'll be back with an episode of the First Israeli-Palestinian War.